So democracy and rule of law have entered dangerous, uncharted waters in Sri Lanka. Since its independence, Sri Lanka has experienced three waves of violence, but the country has never dealt with its past. Communities have never been given an opportunity to come to terms with their suffering, and those responsible have, with very few exceptions, been held to account. When in 2015, Sri Lanka co-sponsored and signed the UN Human Rights Council resolution, there was a moment of hope that the newly elected government would not only support international transitional justice efforts, but would even attempt to put in place similar local mechanisms. But this optimism was short-lived, in part because of the government's non-implementation of what had been initially promised, but more importantly, following the elections in 2020, of a government believing it had received a clear populist Sinhalese Buddhist mandate encouraging it in its exclusionary policies. There are well-founded fears that Sri Lanka's democratic system is now under threat. Sri Lanka today faces a dangerous mix of political and social forces, the spread of COVID and the fear and suspicion it brings, a deteriorating economy crippled by COVID and debt, and heading towards sovereign default or a painful international bailout. The authoritarian concentration of power and the fear and suspicion it brings, aided by rapid deterioration of civil administration, and the active cultivation of anti-minority sentiments, particularly against the Muslims. Together, these have begun to produce anger and instability, to which traditionally the state has never hesitated to respond with violence and repression. The country has begun to travel down a dangerous path that could spark instability that would bring Sri Lanka and its international partners much greater difficulties later on. Sri Lanka's problems can't be solved by the UN or other outside powers. The drive and commitment to come to terms with a painful past and to address the dangerous divisions and tensions of today need to come from within the country, and an enlightened leadership must show the direction. Such leadership seems to currently be lacking. Once more, Sri Lanka presents the question of the seriousness and effectiveness of the UN's commitment to fulfilling its human rights mandate. As was already mentioned, I led the internal investigation of the UN's performance at the end of the Sri Lankan Civil War. The review highlighted the systemic nature of the organization's inability to fully assume its protection responsibilities. The Secretary General at the time, Ban Ki-moon, accepted the damning conclusions of the report and introduced a policy that placed human rights and protection at the forefront of UN action. But the policy, as it was articulated then, did not survive the transition into the new Secretary General's tenure. It was in part defeated by the emergence of a Darwinian type of New World Order, with various forms of nationalism taking on more central roles in defining international relations. But the issue remained on the Secretary General's agenda. In early 2019, the Secretary General commissioned a confidential review of how to strengthen the organizational culture in support of human rights. The review found that there continued to be a lack of commitment by senior leadership to addressing human rights concern. The review concluded that there was an urgent need for clear internal communication on the importance of safeguarding UN values and upholding human rights. That there was a need to provide better incentive structures for strong leadership, which included accountability for inaction on human rights. And finally, the need to equip staff with the required knowledge and skills to champion human rights across the organization. In line with the aforementioned stated intentions, another significant contribution to the UN's commitment to try to operate in complex situations has come out of the Secretary General's 2017 reform agenda. The reform has three components to it: peace and security, development, and management. The development component of the reform agenda entailed detaching the resident coordinator position from its agency responsibility, in this case UNDP, and linking the position directly to the Deputy Secretary General, and tasking the mandate of the position to the accomplishment of the Sustainable Development Goals. The freeing of the UN in-country representative from any agency responsibility and linking the position directly to the Deputy Secretary General through the newly created Development Coordination Office, in theory, increases the capacity of the position to convene and coordinate a UN system-wide response, which would include now the Bretton Woods institutions. Basing the RC's mandate on the accomplishments of the SDGs should also help to depoliticize the position, while still retaining its ability to address questions of governance and protection. And so it is almost undeniable that today there is a greater awareness in the UN of the importance of its protection responsibilities. Over the last year, high-level meetings on Sri Lanka, some even chaired by the UN Secretary General, have underscored the UN's commitment to its protection mandate. Understandings have been reached on the importance of calibrating messaging from in-country and headquarters structures in New York and Geneva that assert the basic UN principles. Critical importance has been given to developing a comprehensive UN strategy that would allow for engagement with the government, provide services to the people, and firmly assert UN principles relating to human rights, social cohesion, non-discrimination, and transitional justice. Unfortunately, these good intentions have yet to result in concrete action. The ability and willingness of the UN to promote a coherent approach towards fulfilling its mandates as ascribed to it by its charter is frustrated by internal rivalries and the lack of an overall commitment to ensure system-wide compliance. The UN today as an entity continues to be dysfunctional in its approach to dealing with the emergence of serious human rights abuses and threats. It's not a question of the UN not having the tools and mechanisms to do so, but rather lacking the will and courage to use them effectively. Sri Lanka's challenges today are fundamentally political and human rights in nature. The UN's relevance in Sri Lanka has to be directly linked to the upholding of its founding principles as articulated in its charter, a charter to which all of the General Assembly member states have subscribed. This means that the UN leadership must find the courage to prioritize principled approaches over political calculations and programmatic engagement. To have a meaningful impact in Sri Lanka, the whole of the UN system needs to work in step as one to promote its values. Will it do so? Only time and history will tell. In the immediate though, I would urge those in greatest need not to count on the UN being able to live up to its responsibility towards we the people. Not counting on the organization to live up to the UN Charter, of which we the people is the preamble, will avoid major disappointments and unnecessary suffering. But were I to be proven wrong, then the world will have become a much better place. Thank you.